Welcome to New Possibilities. I speak truth to power without fear. So yesterday I came across an article in the Washington Post about Richard Spencer. He's one of the leaders of the alt-right movement. And he led a protest of dozens of people. And the thing that was very disturbing about this protest is that these guys were protesting at night and they actually had torches. And that's kind of a reminder of the KKK. That's what it brings to mind. I remember seeing the images in various documentaries of the KKK with torches, lighting crosses to terrify black people and black communities into submission. And that's what it reminds me of. And the thing that they were protesting was the removal of Confederate images, like in particular, a Confederate statue of Robert E. Lee. And this has become an issue in the campaign for governor there. One of the candidates named Corey Stewart has made this an issue. He's talked about how it's political correctness to remove these statues. He's complained about political correctness. He talked about how it's historical vandalism to remove these statues. And I just want to take time to talk about this for a second. I mean, many of these people, they celebrate the removal of, for instance, statues of Lenin or Stalin following the end of the Cold War. They celebrated that. They saw that as a sign of liberty. Many of these people, they celebrated the removal of statues of Saddam Hussein after the United States invaded Iraq. And, you know, the people there had an uprising and they started to tear down these old symbols. They were symbols of oppression. And there's no greater symbol of oppression in America than these Confederate symbols. The Confederacy was all about defending the institution of slavery. There is no other form of oppression worse than slavery, where black people were sold as property. We weren't viewed as human beings. We were viewed like cattle. And in fact, cattle were treated better than the African American. We were stripped of everything, stripped of our very humanity, our very identity, stripped of our original languages, stripped of our cultural customs, and made into the American Negro, reduced into becoming niggers, from Africans to niggers. That's what they created. They turned us into that. They stripped us of everything. They raped us, beat us, sold us, abused us in every imaginable way. For hundreds of years, not for a few years, not for a couple of decades, but for centuries. We were subjected to the worst form of oppression ever. And these Confederates, they fought to preserve that institution of oppression. That's what they fought to preserve. These people, in their fight to preserve that institution of slavery, they killed hundreds of thousands of people in that fight. Those Confederates rebelled against the United States. They were the opposite of a patriot because they were traitors. They were treasonous. You know, they fought against their own government, against their own people, causing massive death and destruction. There's nothing to celebrate when it comes to the Confederacy. As a new society that's trying to move towards inclusion, trying to move towards equality, professing to be a nation that's governed by a constitution that that talks about rights, that talks about how people should be treated equally, in a country that's supposedly founded upon the Declaration of Independence, that talks about all men are created equal. If we are to fulfill those ideals, those symbols of oppression don't belong in today's society. The only place where they belong is in a museum, much like the Holocaust Museum, because for black people in this country, slavery was the Holocaust. It was worse than the Holocaust. The Holocaust, and not to diminish, the suffering of the Jews or anything like that, but we were enslaved for hundreds of years, and our enslavement didn't happen in a foreign country. It happened right here in America. So we have every right to demand the removal of these symbols of hatred. Nobody says that that Nazi symbols should be celebrated in Germany or in anywhere, any place in the world. Those symbols are roundly condemned and universally condemned, and the same should be true for these Confederate symbols. Those symbols have to be dismantled. That's one of the signs of a liberated society. They get rid of the symbols of oppression. They get rid of the symbols of tyranny. And there's no greater symbol of tyranny than these Confederate symbols. Because thousands of people died in that Civil War. In slavery, millions of people died during the Middle Passage. And even worse than physical death, our people suffered a spiritual and psychological death. So, I just think that this whole thing about it's not about political correctness. It's not just about that. This is not historical vandalism, because those symbols should be placed somewhere like a museum. Nobody's saying that history should be deleted or omitted, but it shouldn't be celebrated. When you create statues, you are celebrating what those statues represent. You don't create statues of villains. You don't create statues of people who commit human rights violations. A statue is a sign of honor, and those kind of people do not deserve to be honored in today's society. And also, I just want to talk about this alt-right movement. This alt-right movement is something that's very serious, that shouldn't be taken lightly. These people are gaining in their political power and influence. One of their own is in the White House right now. The chief political strategist is from this alt-right movement. So these people are no longer just at the fringes of society. And the fact that these guys are basically defending the position of a governor, somebody who's running for the position of governor, that tells you this is not a fringe issue. This is a mainstream candidate running for governor, basically condemning the removal of these statues. So this is not something that's on the fringes. These people are gaining legitimacy, they are gaining influence, and they can't be taken lightly. And I think that the symbolism is very powerful. The symbolism of torches, that is something that shouldn't be taken lightly, because it goes back to the days of the KKK. See, these people, they no longer wear hoods and all that kind of stuff. They proudly show their faces, because that's how emboldened they have become. So those are my thoughts. Tell me what you think. Please rate, comment, and subscribe. Peace.